Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are, forget what they think. So just be who you are and forget what they think.
Welcome to With the Mic, content driven by veterans issues. So today we're going to do something a little different. I mean, I guess it's not too different. We're going to do a throwback episode. I'm going to look back at one of my episodes from early in my catalog. I think it was the third one, actually. And we're going to look at Hollywood representations. Now, a little bit later, I do have a few questions from listeners that I'd like to answer today, but I just wanted to talk more about media representations because when you start a project like this, there's just so much you want to talk about, and sometimes it's hard to really narrow down some of these topics to the precision that you'd like to. So as we're getting a little better here at Vet with a Mic, I thought, you know what, let's go back and talk about this one, especially now since we've talked to at least two veterans who work within Hollywood, and we've talked to so many other veterans and heard about how stereotypes and civilian interactions impact them. So I thought we would look at Hollywood representations again and how these may actually play a bigger role in these interactions than we realize. So let's start way back when, about 100 years ago, a little more actually now. Let's go back to World War I. So during World War I, we actually had, or right before World War I, we actually had a pretty small military. But to keep up with our European counterparts, we needed to expand. So we took this venture on and had a rapid expansion. Well, when you do things like that, there may be details that you miss. One of the details was clearly what you're going to do with all of these people after the uniform when you discharge them. So World War I era policies were pretty woefully unprepared to deal with this large influx of people who have served. Now, World War I veterans really got the shaft. There was not a lot of medical care for them. There was no disability or pension services. They even marched on Washington to try to get those things. Wasn't successful. So, since no veteran lives in isolation, their families were obviously pretty bitter about how their brothers were being treated in life after the uniform. So the American population was not quick to offer up their next generation for service. Matter of fact, they largely saw World War I as a European problem. So they didn't want to get involved in any other world problems. Just trying to take care of home. Now, I remember the first time I learned about this was in a persuasion of psychology course. It was a really cool course. And so they talked about how early in the war effort for World War II, the Pentagon and Hollywood actually collaborated to help change the isolationist approach that the American people largely had at the time. They wanted to soften that approach. They wanted to soften the ideas, change the hearts and minds of the American people towards military intervention. So they came up with this movie called Why We Fight, and released it to the American public. Now, granted, largely this was to try to counteract some of the Nazi Germany propaganda that was going out. This was obviously a good idea. Nazi Germany had to be stopped. So it may make your skin crawl a little bit to think about that the Pentagon and Hollywood collaborated together to change the opinion of the American people, but this is really one of those things. It was an all hands on deck type of situation to deal with Germany. And it largely was successful. Of course, Pearl Harbor solidified the American will towards fighting at that point, but it was something that the Pentagon and Hollywood both benefited from. The military brought in additional funding and a certain authenticity to the storytelling that Hollywood just didn't have access to. And of course, these stories gave a mythology, a rewriting of history to the military. They were able to tell stories of heroicism, this heroic archetype in which young men and young women can model themselves after to make military service an honor, a duty. So it largely worked. It rebranded the military and it gave them a fresh start with a new generation. It's not the first time that the Pentagon and Hollywood have mutually benefited each other in this way. Matter of fact, in Vietnam, same thing happened. Vietnam was a nightmare for the American foreign policy. It was largely a black eye. So coming out of Vietnam with the drafts and the, let's just say, less than popular war effort, Hollywood came in to help the military rebrand again. Movies like Top Gun, Platoon, you name it, gave a different perspective, a storytelling perspective to the uniform that allowed a new generation to see the military lifestyle differently. Now, the problem with these kind of stories is they are sensationalized, but they also remove a lot of context, remove a lot of nuance. They make things black and white. There's clear villains and heroes. And that's just not the way life works. But we take that with us into our uniform experience. Not to mention, because they're Hollywood stories, we got to have action-packed, thrilling stories. So they only choose the smallest of representations of the uniform experience. Now, you and I know that, or all the veterans out there listening. Civilians, however, they don't. They don't know how distorted the Hollywood perspective is for the uniform. They think we are all out there storming the beaches of Normandy, or that we're all doing running and gunning through the streets of Iraq or in the hills of Afghanistan. Truth is that that's a rather small percentage of people in the uniform. But civilians don't know that. So we all know when Hollywood's got something wrong. When we see a movie and somebody does something that looks silly or just not realistic. Let's just take weapons, for example. How many times have you seen Hollywood portrayals do something that you know is silly? It's just totally unrealistic. Now, regardless of what your job in the uniform is, you've had, I would say, at least some baseline level of weapons handling. That's probably a lot more than the average civilian. So they don't realize how silly or how unrealistic some of these media representations are. So they take them as accurate. So, where does that leave us? These Hollywood representations that are largely designed to establish hero mythology, well, that's a smack dab contradiction to 85% of the uniform. At least 85% of the uniform. And civilians see it and believe that this is accurate. So that's where these little rub up against jackassy questions is how I've framed it or phrased it at least a few times. They come up with their questions thinking that they're largely informed based on the media representations in which they've seen. They don't know the subtle differences between the branches and the type of taskings in which they do. I know, being a sailor, that civilians largely don't know how dangerous some of our occupations actually are. I have been told several times, well, at least you were just in the Navy, you didn't do anything dangerous. Forget my job. There are a ton of jobs in the Navy that are inherently dangerous. Working on a flight deck has got to be dangerous. But I digress. Civilians don't know any better. And so they have these inaccurate representations that they're drawing from of what life in the uniform is. That's why we get asked questions like, hey, did you kill anybody? All those things that just immediately set us on edge. But do we internalize these representations as well? I kind of think we do. Because I talk to a lot of veterans, and largely this is anecdotal. I haven't tracked it, so don't hold me to that. But I hear words like, oh, I just did this. It was no big deal. This just happened. And whenever you hear a word like just, what you're doing is you're placing a value. You're making a judgment. So whenever you judge your service based on some other external, let's just say, standard, you may rob yourself of the contribution in which you made in the uniform. So these tropes, these Hollywood tropes, these versions of military service, they impact us too. We may go, oh, well, I did not have this type of uniform experience, so therefore I just did admin. I just did mechanic work, whatever. But here's the bottom line of it. If you've deployed, you're doing those type of tasks in a dangerous place. If you're doing aviation mechanic work on, let's just say, a flight deck, your life could be in danger. So let's not undercut what we do. It makes us feel some kind of way about what we did in the uniform. And of course, we've talked a lot about this. All that time you spent away from your family, on the holidays, just all of those sacrifices you made for something bigger than you. They're valid. They're important. Regardless if you're kicking in doors in Iraq or not, they're valid. They're important. And this is the real, this is the bitch of it. Even when I talk to veterans who did some really high speed stuff, they say the same thing. They undercut what their service is. So it's something that we all do, regardless of whatever our uniformed experience is. So what does that say? Why do we not feel that we did enough? It's a good question. I largely think that the way we feel about the military in our culture, these movies that we see of heroicism and maybe even loss of life in the line of duty, those are the things in which we're comparing our service to. But that's just a movie. It's not real life. Even the things that did happen that the movies are basing them on, like Black Hawk Down, for example, those situations were a lot more nuanced than the movie portrays them as. And when they happened in real life, I mean, it was pretty embarrassing for the American military at the time. We're able to retell those stories and rewrite them in a way that may have been less than accurate. And I think whenever you tell those stories in ways that are sensationalized, you put an undue pressure on veterans to hold to that standard. Now, we talked a little bit about stereotypes in at least 3 episodes before, and what stereotype threat is. So I'll tell it again. Stereotype threat is an internal discomfort that you feel about inadvertently confirming a negative stereotype, usually, or not being able to uphold a positive stereotype. So it puts us into this position as veterans to try to hold the standard that largely is not based in reality, so that we can protect the image of the uniform and uphold the standard of those who came before us. That's a lot of pressure. And of course, the negative stereotype that's also portrayed in media is that we're all loose cannons, just clicking out, that we can't hold down jobs or whatever else. I mean, there's just a ton of tropes that you see, good or bad, in military movies. It's hard to contend with those. And when you're walking through the world, having interactions with the civilians, them saying jackassy comments and asking questions, it's hard for that not to bother you. It's hard for that not to cause rub-ups in your, let's just say, your mental health. Why would it though? I mean, I know that we've talked about this at least a few times. I don't feel connected largely to a lot of the civilians that I come in contact with. The further away from the uniform I get, the less of an issue it is. But my first couple years, I felt like I could not relate to the majority of civilians. And that's completely normal. Like if you look in the psychological literature for veterans, there's a lot of people who talk about that. When they're interviewing veterans, that comes up a lot. So it's okay to feel that way. Even from your own like friends and families that you've known your entire life. It's okay to feel disconnected because you're a member of a different culture now. A culture that is alien mostly to the American culture. Now, we talked about this just the other day with the 2 Marines who are artists. Talked about what it's like to be away from home on a holiday, specifically something like Christmas. Civilians have no frame of reference. So they really can't comprehend what we're talking about because they've never had to do it. They've never been able to even fathom doing it. To them, that may be a bridge too far. So it's okay to feel estranged from these people, to feel completely disconnected from them. I guess the question then is, what do you do about that? I obviously I'm a little biased. It's my hypothesis, I guess you'd call it, is to turn into the veteran identity, to really integrate yourself within the veteran continuum. So what is the veteran continuum? Regardless of whatever your military experience is, you're still a veteran. Whether you're in the reserves or you're active duty, you're a veteran. Whether you deployed or where you were stationed stateside, you're a veteran. Because the overarching culture, the military culture, is what binds us all. We've all had to sacrifice. We've all been away from home on Christmas. We've all missed holidays. And those type of sacrifices unite you. They act as a bond, a cohesive bond. Because we all know what that's like. I can talk to Air Force veterans, or I can talk to Marines, or soldiers, and it's all the same culture that we draw from. There's a shorthand. And I'm going to tell you, I feel really connected. Now look, there's still going to be brothers and sisters from the uniform that you're not going to like personally. That's okay too. There's a lot of, let's just call them abrasive people out there. So it's not like 100%. But that's okay. Turn to your veteran community. Integrate that into who you are. Because as we've talked at least a couple episodes, there's a period of time in which, you kind of mourn your time in the uniform. Maybe a little angry about it. Maybe a little salty. We all feel that way. It's okay. So you want to reinvent who you are now that you're out of the uniform. To me, that process involves integrating who you are as a veteran. I've said this quite a few times at this point now. I identify more now with that I served than I did to being in the uniform itself. It just allows you to be a little different, to take a little bit more of who you are, not just what you did in the uniform. So I really embrace that. And it helps me. Well, I know we've talked a few times about the you're on the side of the road metaphor. And you've got that flat tire. Think of so many things in life that can represent. There's a crisis that happens. And you don't know what it takes to make that crisis go away. Just having people that you can rely on to answer that call immediately makes that problem feel less threatening. I remember there was a young Marine. I was in the gym, no kidding. He called me. He's having some car trouble. That's whenever I really started to think about this perspective a little. So this young Marine, we had to be at least 10 years difference in age. He was probably no older than 23. He called me up. He was having car trouble. Needed me to come help him. Now, he was a university student. And I went. I dropped what I was doing in the gym, and I went to see him. I went to help him. And so I asked him, "Did you call me?" I know you got buddies from the gym. I know you got friends from campus. Why'd you call me? You know what he said? Because I know you'd come. Think about that. He knew that I would come. He knew I would come render aid to him in a tough spot. See, that's what matters. There's something about our culture. No matter where we are, what we're doing, we're going to help each other. Now, you can't say all, you can't say everybody, but you know that we've all got that list of people that ride or die. You know that if you call, they're going to roger up. They're going to answer the call. And that's what he was really talking about. He knew that our shared culture, our shared veteran culture, the fact that we both had served, acted as a shorthand that civilians will never understand. Are there civilians that will come to your aid? Sure. But it's something that is just beaten into us. Don't leave people behind. You take care of each other. And that's why I say, really integrate into the veteran identity, because there's power in that. There's social capital. Every person that you know knows other people. It just acts as a force multiplier to give you more capital and resources out there. Now, I know we've kind of gotten a little bit away from the Hollywood representations bit, but I just wanted to say that don't let how everybody else who doesn't understand us impact you. Turn to your brothers and sisters who did serve, because they get you a lot more than civilians do, because they have no frame of reference. Even the veteran who only had stateside orders knows what it's like to be away from home for a long period of time. So even if it's just that you connect with, it makes you feel connected. That's what's important. So here's a little psychological tip, right? We're basically talking about social support. Social support is powerful. I could tell you at least 10 things that social support has been shown to help reduce stress, cardiovascular risk, mental health symptoms, you name it. Social support has been shown to act as a remedy. Not the whole thing, but it really does help ease it. Just like that tire analogy. Tire still has to be changed. The stressor still has to go away. But just the fact that you have people to rely on, and you know that they will come to your aid, it really does help. You feel as if the world is just a little less threatening. Just something to think about. Because we have to put these things into context. Why veterans interact the way that they do with each other, why we think about our service the way we do, why civilians interact with us the way in which they do. As soon as you understand that, I don't know, it's just a little easier to not take it personal. It's just a little easier to roll with the punches. Go with the flow. They're just coming from a perspective that we know is, well, bullshit. But they don't. They don't know that yet. Maybe one day they will. Probably never will be able to completely understand it. Because it's just something you have to go through. You may be able to, there's a cool little saying, right? I can empathize, but I cannot sympathize. And so that in a nutshell is this. I can understand that must be really difficult to go through. But sympathize, I know that there could be some people out there that are linguists, but sympathize to me is to suffer with, right? That you have been through something very similar. So I can empathize, but I cannot sympathize, is the civilian perspective. Veterans, we sympathize. We've been through it together. Just something to chew on for a little bit. I like the little background music, I'm not gonna lie. It makes things a little bit more rhythmic to me. All right, so let's get to some questions. All right. This one's one that I know has been brought up on at least 2 episodes, but let's talk about it. All right, so this one comes out of Arizona. Does disability take money from others? So let's unpack that a little bit. I assume you mean, does filing a disability claim through the VA take money from other veterans? So the answer is no, it's not. That's a myth. A lot of people think that you're competing with your other brothers and sisters from the uniform. Truth is that the money's already been allocated. When you go through MEPS, they're evaluating it, right? They do so pretty thoroughly. We all remember that one part of the examination that felt really thorough. But MEPS is essentially, they're evaluating your goods, right? What your standard was before the uniform. Because the uniform is hard. The lifestyle is hard. The jobs are often pretty difficult on the body, even if it's just as simple as PT test. Think about occupations outside of the uniform if they had to give somebody a timed run and push-up sit-ups. Civilians would never be eligible to be hired. But because we have to do those things, it may cause us to be a little less cautious with our body to make sure that we're in good shape, right? Joint hurts, you have to keep pushing up. You have to keep doing push-ups so that you don't get in trouble. Don't want to get a discharge, an unfavorable discharge, or some terrible write-up for your evaluation because you didn't do enough push-ups. So you just push through the pain. So those things are cumulative in nature. They add up to a lot of wear and tear on the body and the brain, the mind. The lifestyle is a bit alien, like we talked about. The military culture is a bit alien. So the military knows that, the VA knows that. That's the reason why funds have been allocated out there for you. So you're not taking it away from anybody else by applying. All right? You're not a dirtbag. You're not somebody who's a parasite. You're just entitled to those things because the service puts a lot of wear and tear on the body. And if you're pretty young getting out, you may think, I'm fine, I'm good. I know I felt that way too. But my body started breaking down really quickly. Probably about a year, 2 years after, I had a lot of things just start to fall apart on me. Because the uniform is more difficult on your body than you realize. The chronic stress does a lot of things to a lot of parts of your body, and you don't really think about it because you may be familiar with what a frog in the pot is, right? It's a metaphor. So if you put a frog in a pot on the stove and then you turn on the heat, that frog will sit there in the water and not move, even though the entire time that pot is getting hotter. because it's getting hotter across time incrementally, the frog just adjusts and it'll boil itself to death. Won't jump out because the water temperature changed slowly. That's the way stress kind of is. So there may be a lot of things that are happening to your brain, to your body from the chronic stress that is the military that you're not necessarily that aware of. So don't be ashamed about filing for disability. The military knows how difficult the service is on your body. Matter of fact, I kind of resent that we have to prove how rough it was on our individual bodies. It's not exactly a fair system in that regard. All right. Question number 2. I have my first mental health appointment. What can I expect? Well, that's a good question. I appreciate that. So there's a couple things that you can expect. Number 1, if this is your first office visit, that can mean a few different things. But a lot of times people will take the first couple of interactions with just getting your history, all the background information about you. So be as thorough as you can with them. Tell them everything. Because you never know, something may seem unrelated to you, but there may be actually some connection to a symptom that you're not aware of. And now I can think of something like, let's just take thyroid issues, for example, right? There's some psychological things that can accompany thyroid issues. And so if you've had some thyroid problem, tell that to your mental health professional too, so that they can take that into consideration. And I just use that as an example. I'm not giving you professional advice. This is just information. But largely, your first session or 2 is going to be background information so that they can know why you're there, what are your symptoms, like what's the background. Has your family ever dealt with anything like this? Just all of these type of questions are probably going to come up. If you've been through a session like that before, well, then the next step typically is to establish goals. What do you want to see happen? Now, okay, so we understand why you're here. What do you want to change? And that's a collaborative process. That's the way it is pretty much in any mental health session. This is you and the provider working together. So you have to be willing to open up a little and give as much as you can. Because you're the expert in you. No one else is the expert in what you've been through, what you're experiencing. You have to just let that out. Now, they may also ask you to fill out some paperwork too, some questions. Those may be psychological tests, screeners for different things. So just follow the instructions on those, I guess would be the thing that I would say. But I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you for taking the step to go see a mental health provider. I hope that helps. But yet again, I just want to say, I am not giving you expert advice. This is a podcast. This is for information and entertainment. All right. So let's get into another question. Woo! All right. So this one's about school. So if none of you are out there going to college, this one, well, maybe who knows? You never know. You might eventually go to college. So let's talk about it. This is my first semester in school. How do I know what professors to avoid? Yeah. So this is one of those things that it really does benefit you to connect with a student organization if you can on campus. Whether it be some center that deals with military students or some social organization, just ask your other veteran buddies. That would be the first thing. People who've been there a little longer. Professors who, let's just say, are problematic, they usually have a pretty good reputation around the campus. That people are not shy about telling you, don't take that guy. Also, if you're new to that school, obviously you may not have found a good little veteran network yet. If that's the case, I would say rate my professor. Now, granted, like, you got to take some of that with a grain of salt, because how mad do you have to be to go rate a person on something like Rate My Professor? But if you get enough people that are like, yeah, blasting a particular professor, you may want to exercise a little caution there. That would be something that I would do, for sure. Yeah. All right, so this is about video games. Are video games bad for you? Ooh, well, I guess the short answer is no. They're not bad for you. All right, there's no context for this question, but anytime when people start saying, rap music or video games make this person more violent or that's all been largely debunked. There's not really much to that. So if, I guess, maybe this person's getting a little friction from home about video games, all I can say is no, video games, whether you're talking about like the first person shooter like Call of Duty, no, they're not bad for you. I wouldn't say. Not from the context it seems like this question is coming from. But no, I would say largely no. Now, there have been some, yet again, just information, not professional advice. I do not know what all the ins and outs of it. Some people say that video games are therapeutic for them. I don't know. Just entertainment. Just information, man. I'm not giving you advice about anything. But I would say no. Largely, video games are completely like just normal thing to do. I would say the other thing that you would necessarily, you don't want anything to take over your life. If it's just anything, in excess is always a bad thing, right? You don't want to you don't want to let any activity take over your life. If you're not meeting your social obligations, like if you've got whoever this person is, I don't know if they're male or female or not, but if your significant other is that thinking that you're not into them anymore because all you want to do is play video games, or you're ignoring taking them to dinner or going to a movie and hanging out, spending time with them, then I would say maybe dial it back a little. Like, it's just from one bud to the next. That's what I would say. Yet again, just entertainment, man. I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life. I like doing these question and answers. I really do. I hope that I continue to get them. This is a lot of fun. I want to just yet again repeat, right, that Vet with a Mic is about information and entertainment. This is to give you some inspiration and motivation about things going on in your life. I don't know if we talked fully about this, but our interviews are supposed to be stories that you can hear And if there's something that resonates with you that a particular interview is doing in their life, apply it to your own, man. See if it works in your life. You know, if you're out there going, man, I need a new hobby. You know, we've talked to at least 4 artists at this point. Get involved in something. Find a new activity that you want to do. Whether it's, you know, music or expressive art like Mia, or crafting like Ray and Solo talked about doing. There's just a lot of ways to do new things and to learn a new process. Those hobbies are really enjoyable. You don't have to necessarily make money at them. It's just something to do to pass the time. And, you know, as we've talked at least a few times on here before, the uniform doesn't leave you with a lot of time for self-exploration, to figure out what the hell you want to do. Because there's just so much going on most of the time in the uniform. And most of us are in the uniform at a pretty, well, I would say, pivotal point in a time of our lives in which we're trying to figure out who the hell we are. You know, if you went in at 18, you get out at 24, man, think about how much growth the average person goes through from 18 to 24. So you may have to check, look, civilians may have had some growth on who they are, figuring out the things in which they like to do. Those are their strengths as far as the time goes. In the uniform, though, we have been more places, we've seen more parts of the world, we've had different types of professional experiences. So that's where our strengths are. So just like the person who never served has to develop that part of themselves, after we serve, we have to develop our own self-exploration too. We have to figure out what we want to do in life and what we like to do in life, what brings us joy. Just something to think about. Maybe it's video games. Just wanted to say thanks to everybody who writes in these questions. I really do enjoy them. I really appreciate everybody that listens too. I guess that's a pretty good place to wrap it up here. This coming week, we're going to be talking to a couple of really cool veterans who are doing some things in the veteran space that is really kind of cool. One is a doctor of social work. She has got an organization that focuses on, you know, military sexual trauma. It's called glasssoldier.org. And then we're going to talk to some Canadian friends of mine, some veterans from the Great White North, and how their life after the uniform compares to the American veteran experience. I just thought that would be something to be cool to talk about. These guys, actually, one of them is a female. I shouldn't say these guys. They got some really cool perspectives, and we're going to hear a little bit more about them in this coming week. But I think that's a good place to call it. As always, however life finds you, I hope life finds you well. Till next time.